am. And you can see my full name, also my student number in here. Now I will share about my topic in English class. My topic is about genes and rivets were invented by accident. Explain how the unplanned invention can be very useful for human beings. Find other examples for unplanned inventions in the world and explain how they can play important roles in human history. What would happen to humanity if those unplanned inventions didn't happen in the world? Explain. One day, in the mining, clothing used by miners in the sale by Levi-Strauss get many damaged and torn, so that the miners are angry to the seller in salary by Levi-Strauss, resulting in persecution of miners against the seller of clothes on the payroll by Levi-Strauss. Then all sellers in salary Levi-Strauss reported the incident and they don't want to sell clothes from Levi-Strauss and fear of being persecuted again. For the incident left many clothes not sold, so Levi-Strauss suffer. If he can't sell clothes because the miners don't want to buy clothes that are sold by Levi-Strauss. So Levi-Strauss tried to find another tailor to his problem, and he found Jacob Davis store in Nevada to solve the problem. But a few days later, Levi-Strauss complaint received by Jacob Davis Taylor. So he did what clothing material research about strong for mine worker in accordance with the records Levi-Strauss. Then he found the rivets were initially applied to saddle of horse, but after that he tried to pair the jeans, and he think it works well to reestablish the stress point on the trousers. Place, of, place a point of stress point located on the corner of the back and crotch seam, where the part is often torn when used for heavy activity. With the use of rivet complaints from miners resolved and jeans sales growing rapidly. Using rivets on the jeans make jeans has its own characteristic. If there are pants that have rivets, that pants will be jeans. Rivets become a gimmick for jeans. That make jeans have a good characteristic. It's the rivet. That is my unplanned invention in jeans. So next I will explain about another unplanned invention. Another unplanned invention is tea. So I will tell you about the history of tea.
Welcome to A Brief History of Tea, the world's second most drunk beverage after water at 3 billion cups a day. Tea is native to Southeast Asia, especially around southern China. Legend has it that Chinese Emperor Shen Nong was sitting in his garden sipping a cup of boiled water as was the custom. Leaves from a nearby bush blew and landed into his cup, turning the water green. He tasted it and liked it. This legend has no proof, however. During the Tang Dynasty, a book was published by Lu Yu entirely about tea. It talks about tea drinking, the way tea was grown, how it was processed, how to prepare tea, and how tea was evaluated in quality. Tea was made into bricks which were used as money in the outer regions of the empire. In the Song Dynasty, people invented powdered tea, making it easier to brew. Later, in the 13th century, the Chinese roasted the tea leaves and then crumbled them instead of steaming them, thus inventing loose-leaf tea. Tea became so popular that the government accepted it as tribute from other countries or provinces. Japanese priests and monks introduced tea to Japan, and the emperor encouraged people to grow it. tea promptly became a drink of the higher religious classes and an important part of Japanese life, as is shown by their tea ceremony. Tea then spread across Asia and towards Europe. An Arab trader in 879 recorded that most of Guangdong's money came from taxes on tea and salt. In 1557, Portugal took control of Macau. News of the wonderful, wonderful tea spread back to Europe. The Dutch established the Dutch East India Company and brought back green tea leaves to Amsterdam. Tea spread to England in the 1650s and from there spread to British colonies around the world. In India before British rule, tea was grown for medical usage. Britain decided to grow tea there as the climates were similar to China's. They hoped to stop relying so heavily on the Chinese monopoly. Tea was stolen out of China and Indian plantations began production. In 1833, the East India Company sent in a botanist to China to bring back more species of tea to India so that the company could begin its own production instead of trading Chinese tea. Using Chinese seeds and techniques, the British started their tea trade by giving land to anyone who agreed to grow it and export it. Native tea plants were soon discovered in Burma, however. The British East India Company came to India and began mass production of tea on plantations across the colony. It spread from India to Sri Lanka in 1867. These plantations solely grew black tea. India became the largest producer of tea in the world for nearly 100 years. The largest consumer in Europe was the United Kingdom. Britain began to import tea in the 1660s from Amsterdam. The British East India Company became one of the largest in the world, controlling parts of India and owning a private army of around 280,000 men by 1857. The company even bought Singapore and established it as a colony. At one point, the East India Company controlled more territory than the United Kingdom itself did. The East India Company learned that tea was the most profitable of its trades. It was originally advertised as a medical drink, but at the close of the 17th century, by the power of advertising, was an all-purpose one. By 1750, tea had become Britain's favorite drink. The British East India Company noticed that ships returning from the East Indies were sometimes empty or half full. Huge amounts of advertising to the British public rose demand and shipments began filling the half-empty ships. A fungus in 1869 destroyed Sri Lanka's coffee production, making tea even more popular. Sri Lankan farmers, devastated by the destruction of their coffee, soon switched over to tea. Britain liked tea, but it liked sweet tea more. The solution? Grow sugarcane, and lots of it. African colonies began to export sugar more rapidly to meet the vast demand. Tea is still seen as a symbol of Britishness, and rightly so, as Britain inhales a staggering 160 million cups a day, or around 58 billion cups a year. As the American Revolution kicked off, tea drinking in the 13 colonies dropped sharply as it was considered unpatriotic, and that is why most Americans drink coffee today instead. This tipped the East India Company close to bankruptcy. Unfortunately, during the Qing dynasty, the emperor decided that China was the center of the world and of everything, and so everyone must pay China in silver. British wealth began to drop as the silver from its treasury was traded for the precious tea. To solve the money issue, the British began to grow opium poppies, which were then traded into China for tea. Opium spread through China, and soon the public was hooked. The Chinese banned the opium trade, and with now no extra income to pay the traders to bring back tea, and tea forming a big slice of the British Empire's taxes, London declared war in 1839. Britain lost 69 troops in 3 years, while China lost around 20,000. After peace, where Britain forced China to buy drugs from them, Britain declared war again in 1856, saying that China had broken the treaty, starting the Second Opium War. Tea also helped contribute to the start of the Industrial Revolution, because of the caffeine boost it gave workers, allowing them to work longer shifts in the factories. During the Industrial Revolution, tea drinking prevented diseases across cities because in order to make tea, people had to boil the water, thus killing most of the bacteria inside. Nowadays, many people use the tea bag in order to brew their tea. Tea merchant Thomas Sullivan first invented tea bags in the United States in 1908. He began to sell samples of his tea in small bags. People thought that the bags were supposed to be put in the teapots as with metal strainers, and thus the tea bag was born. The idea took off in the US quickly, but in the United Kingdom, tea bags didn't catch on until 1953, when tea producer Tetley began to advertise them. Today, as in the past, India and China are still the leading producers of tea, though tea has spread to 35 countries, a long shot from the old Chinese monopoly. 3 billion cups of the stuff are inhaled every day across the globe, perhaps because tea is cheap to make at roughly 3 cents a cup at home. To meet the demand for 2012 alone, 4.68 million tons were grown, and more added every year.
From the last video, we can know the history of tea. Tea invented around the year 2370 before Christ. The Emperor Senang was boiling a hot drink, but apparently he forgot to shut the boiler water, so that accidentally went blowing a leaf in the vicinity of his residence and went into the kettle. At the time of the emperor would take the drink. Apparently, leaves it is mixed with the beverage and fragrance outstanding issue, and when tasted it was very enjoyable. Since then, the tea began to circulate in China. Drink tea influence in Japan. Tea seeds brought by a young pastor named Ye Si-hee eventually became known as the father of Japanese tea. In Japan, drinking tea became part of the culture and art. Japanese society make tea drinking culture as a secret ceremony and can also specify determine the identity of caste and social class. Tea drinking culture spread also in Europe. Tea began to enter Europe in the time of Elizabeth I, which later became a trend in the Netherlands, causing the price of tea to be expensive, reaching $100 per pound. This brought prosperity to the sellers of tea and at the time. Tea history cannot be separated from the events of the Boston Tea Party. Boston Tea Party is a protest conducted by the American population against the British occupiers. They destroyed the 3 ships carrying tea in the port Boston. Boston saw that the water in the harbor is filled with tea. Boston Tea Party sparked the American Revolution. At the time, the American people are committed to not consume tea as a form of protest. Until now, the tea became a common drink for people around the world. On the two cases I mentioned, not all invention found with by the planning. So do not stop to hoping to create something useful for the world, because it could be happening. When we try to invent or create something new, unintentionally we discover new things and more beneficial to the world. I think just it my description for unplanned invention in the world. So thank you for watching.